All right, so today we're going to dig into a source that tackles a pretty big paradox. We live in a world that talks constantly about diversity and inclusion, right? But at the same time, deep-seated discrimination, it just refuses to go away. Why is that? Well, the analysis we're about to unpack proposes a really controversial answer, and it links it directly to the engine of our modern economy. So let's get right into it.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll look at the core thesis, the big idea. Then, we need to define a couple of key concepts so we're all on the same page. After that, we'll dive into the real-world mechanisms the source says are at play, and we'll wrap up by looking at the solutions it proposes.
So yeah, this is the central puzzle, isn't it? I mean, we publicly champion equality, we have all these initiatives, yet these deep, systemic divides, they're still here. And according to this analysis, the answer isn't just about what's in people's hearts and minds. No, it's about the very structure of our economy.
Okay, let's get right to the main argument here. The source puts forward a pretty provocative idea. It asks, what if discrimination isn't just some unfortunate bug in the system, but is actually a feature? What if it's somehow functional for the system?
And here's the core claim. The source argues that discrimination isn't just some accident, it's what it calls a useful byproduct. So how could that be? Well, the idea is that it can help lower labor costs, it can split any sense of solidarity among workers, and it helps make huge levels of inequality seem, normal, maybe even justified. That is a huge claim, so to really get our heads around it, we absolutely have to unpack the key terms they're using.
Okay, so to really grasp this argument, we've got to understand the two core concepts that are driving the whole thing: turbo-capitalism and structural discrimination. Let's define exactly what the source means by those.
Okay, first up, turbo-capitalism. Now, the easiest way to think of this is like capitalism on steroids. It's super high speed, it's focused on finance, and it's just relentlessly competitive. But the key dynamic here, according to the source, is something called risk transfer. So for example, instead of a company taking on the risk and costs of a full-time employee, that risk gets pushed down onto, say, a gig worker. That's the kind of downward pressure this analysis is talking about.
All right, the second key term is structural discrimination. And this one is absolutely crucial to understand. The analysis is not just talking about one person's prejudice against another. It's talking about bias that's literally baked into the rules of the game, and how we hire people, who gets approved for a mortgage, which schools get more funding, and even in the way our state policies are designed.
So, the big question is, how do these two concepts actually connect? Well, the analysis identifies specific mechanisms that it says link the pressures of turbo-capitalism directly to the persistence of discrimination. Let's take a look at how this is supposed to operate.
The source actually uses this famous quote as a kind of theoretical starting point. Now, you definitely don't have to be a Marxist to follow the logic here. The core idea it's borrowing is simply this: when essential things like housing and jobs are made scarce, and your personal security becomes entirely your problem, well, competition and anxiety are going to skyrocket. And this, the text argues, creates the perfect fertile ground for racism, sexism, and all sorts of other divisions to really take root and grow.
Now, the source actually outlines a whole list of these mechanisms, but to keep things super clear for this explainer, we're just going to focus on three really powerful examples that it provides. We're going to look at what happens in the labor market, the housing market, and with new technology.
Okay, let's break these three down. First up, we've got labor precarity. This is all about the rise of the gig economy, temp work, contract work, jobs with way fewer protections. The source argues that people from discriminated groups often get pushed into these insecure jobs, which makes them way more exploitable. Second, let's talk about the housing market. The argument here is that when housing is treated more like a financial asset to make money from, instead of a basic human need, rents just soar. And then, landlords might start talking about risk management when they choose tenants, which can just be a code word for discriminating against certain people. And third, there's algorithmic bias. Think about it. We use AI for everything now, from job applications to loans. But these systems are trained on historical data, and if that data is full of past biases, well, the algorithm can just automate and scale up that discrimination, all while looking totally objective and neutral.
And it's not just those three. The source points to another really powerful force: austerity. You've probably heard this word. It basically means cutting public spending on things we all rely on, like healthcare, education, and public transit. So when these public services are privatized or just scaled way back, they become commodities you have to buy. And that means your access depends on your ability to pay, which of course puts anyone already facing economic discrimination at an even bigger disadvantage.
And listen, this isn't just some abstract theoretical argument. The source actually cites the World Health Organization to back this point up. The WHO is really clear on this. You are not going to overcome things like health inequities unless you also address the root causes: economic inequality and structural discrimination. According to them, they're basically two sides of the very same coin.
Okay, so after laying out this pretty bleak diagnosis of the problem, what does the source actually propose we do about it? Let's move into our final section, which outlines the potential blueprint for change that it offers.
All right, so the source lays out a 5-point plan. Let's walk through it. Step 1 is to strengthen anti-discrimination laws with real enforcement, with actual controls and sanctions, moving beyond just awareness campaigns. Step 2, reinforce the social state. This means using collective systems like unions, minimum wages, and job security to make people less vulnerable to exploitation. Step 3 is about redistributing resources through public infrastructure. Basically, make housing, education, and healthcare genuinely accessible to everyone, which reduces that fierce competition over basic needs. Step 4, promote media literacy. Teach people how to spot propaganda that uses scapegoating to distract from the real systemic issues. And finally, Step 5, organize practical solidarity. This is about building collective power from the ground up through things like tenant unions and mutual aid networks in our communities.
So, when you look at all these proposed solutions together, the crucial takeaway is this. According to the source, you just can't effectively fight discrimination with symbolic gestures alone. It argues that if you want real change, you have to tackle the economic structures that, it claims, make discrimination profitable and functional in the first place.
And so that leaves us with this final, really provocative question that gets right to the heart of this entire analysis. If the source material we've just explored is correct, that certain economic systems can actually benefit from division and inequality, then can we ever truly achieve equality without fundamentally changing those systems? It's definitely a challenging thought to end on.